Now, I'm sure this is getting a little bit familiar with me saying this, but Titans Season 2 Episode 6, Connor, definitely beats the previous episode for me overall as an experience, and ironically with my favourite episode so far being flashbacks, which I guess you could say this one was because it essentially told the events before when Jason Todd fell, all the way up until when it caught up with it, and well done to you guys who actually guessed how Jason Todd would be saved from that little tragic fall he was doing. But either way, don't get the wrong impression though, I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy Deathstroke's episode last week, which was awesome within its own right, with the presence Titans manages to give Deathstroke, which just feels like an incredible justice to the character. But this episode just really shined through for me personally because I just absolutely love Joshua Orpin's performance as Superboy, and the way Titans is already writing this character just leaves me really looking forward to what lies ahead for him in the show. I've never seen Joshua Orpin in anything before Titans, so regardless of my excitement for Superboy appearing in Titans, I wasn't quite sure how to feel at the end of the day, but with the really complex background behind Connor Kent being the combination of both Superman and Lex Luthor, and the way this episode began to tell that story, it's already making him one of the most interesting characters in the show, even though he literally just debuted this episode. But as always everyone, before we get into the details, which this episode held many, whether that's to do with Clark Kent, Lex Luthor, there was even Martha Kent popping up, and Lionel Luthor, there's a lot of things. I would greatly appreciate it if you could remember to leave a like on this video. You guys usually kill it, but if you're remembering and you're watching this right now, click that little freaking like button. Do it just to show your support for the Titans videos. And if you find yourself brand new here, of course, be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with everything DC Universe. But let's get into episode 6 of Titans Season 2. So this episode started off with that beginning Cadmus Labs ad, with their motto being something like a better future tomorrow, with Superboy meeting Krypto as well, as we were teased at the end of last season, and come on, that handshake was adorable, and we'll get more onto the awesomeness that is Krypto later on because I'm absolutely dying to talk about him. Now, I absolutely loved just seeing Metropolis way in the distance as Superboy and Krypto gazed out at it, and it just really reminded me of the season 1 scene where Dick Grayson opened the windows to his room in Wayne Manor as a kid. Before jumping out, you just saw Gotham City in the background, and it's just something I really commend Titans for in general. Like, they really capture the spirit of the cities, even in just like a little simple glance. I don't know, they just really make it feel real, whereas, you know, versus a show like Batwoman, say what you will about that show, whether it's for good or for worse, in that show Gotham just kind of feels empty. There's no sporadic crime or filth, despite the Batman literally being gone for 3 years, and it's up to you if you really think the Crows could handle 3 years no Batman. I mean, for example, in last season, Titans portrayed a true feeling of Gotham streets even when the Batman is around. But this is where we get introduced to Dr. Eve Watson in the episode, who, despite her involvement with Connor Kent's creation, was a character in the episode which really made you like her, with a story and connection to Connor in the episode. Now, Dr. Eve Watson gave us an insight into Connor very early on in the episode, where she explained that he'd be feeling fear, curiosity, anger, confusion, wonder, and amongst many other things, as he's essentially experiencing everything for the first time, with their predictions that Connor would have like the emotional age of a 2-year-old. I feel like Joshua Orpin did an absolutely fantastic job in portraying that in the episode, as they said themselves, as like he was soaking up the world like a sponge, with just little things of him like walking in the middle of the road, or just taking that Superman shirt, to only then realize that he needed money, and where after saving that lady from the mugging and finding out that the mugger was like after money, the innocent yet completely naive reaction from Connor was hilarious, and he essentially ended up with how intimidating he probably came across to the woman through making mush out of that gun, just like Superman would, made it seem like a mugging within itself. But one of the most compelling and most attractive qualities and character traits to Connor Kent is that he is the literal genetic combination of Superman and Lex Luthor, and from the tease earlier on in the episode with Dr. Watson explaining that for Mercy Graves, who is the personal security service to Lex Luthor and her team to find Superboy, due to the DNA cloning process, epigenetic memories may be their only clue as to where to find him, as, you know, Superboy, as a result of the cloning process, quite literally has memories of the 2 actual men he is made from. And ever since this moment in the episode, you know, got spoken out loud, I was really intrigued to find out what they would show from Superman's life as well as Lex Luthor's. And this led to a very interesting journey for Connor, as when he saw a picture of some crops on the side of a van in Metropolis, this triggered a memory from Clark Kent, where he was playing in the fields at Kent Farm, and then you had had Martha Kent calling out Clark's name, and it was just overall like a very fond memory from Superman. Of course, a very contrasting memory to the one we saw previously, as when that vendor guy who came up to Connor Kent because he was stealing that shirt from him, that triggered a very early memory from Lex, in where despite who Lex Luthor becomes one day, or should I say who he is now, you empathize with his upbringing just in terms of how scared Superboy was in that moment when he relives a memory of Lionel Luthor abusing Lex as a child for accidentally knocking over some alcohol. Now this is where we got to see Connor heading for Kansas, and I have to admit I did want it to be like Smallville and, you know, the Kent farm and everything, and although he stumbled across the wrong home that he recalled previously, yet arguably it's correct at the same time, as it was, you know, Lex Luthor's childhood home. Now this is where we actually get to meet Lionel Luthor for the first time, and I remember posting this photo on the community section of my YouTube channel, and I remember you guys thinking like, are you sure, Boba, like this isn't Jonathan Kent? And by the way, if you want to see photos like this first, join my Discord server, will be in the pinned comment of the comment section down below. I always post the promo for the upcoming episode as soon as they become available. These scenes ahead were just a goldmine for the little details and Easter eggs for this iteration of Superman and Lex Luthor in Titans. Connor mentions how there should be like a big red barn out back, a windmill, and this is when Lionel reminds him that this description sounds awfully familiar to the old Kent farm a couple miles down the end of the road, in which he mentions Clark Kent was a very good friend of Alexander's when he was younger, which Alexander obviously being the longer name for Lex. But as I begun to discuss a second ago, as much as we're not going to see a full-on embodiment of Lex Luthor walking around this season, we still get quite a bit of depth and history behind his character without ever seeing him in the flesh, while at the same time I would even argue that the show actually does offer a portrayal of Lex Luthor, but through that of Superboy, which is just such an interesting opportunity and way to do it, which is why I was just so impressed by this episode and Joshua Orpin. Now this was perfectly shown through things such as Connor's emotions and memories from Lex in the Luthor residence, where there were little details like when we saw pictures of Lex as a child, these awards for winning things in chemistry and science fairs, and his father calling him a genius. Looking back at these memories triggers an anger and rage that Lex has for his upbringing that almost brings Superboy to literally kill Lionel Luthor. Now another thing that was really cool was hearing Lionel explain Lex, that ever since he was a child he always had something missing. This was after Connor confronted him about the abuse of Lex's childhood. Initially Lionel denied it, but said in his own words that he tried to teach him, as he didn't really have a sense of right and wrong, he didn't have a moral compass, and he didn't look to anyone for their approval. But that's when the emotions came out in Connor, and then we got that reveal that Lex always wanted his father's approval. Either way, I found this scene to be very powerful, and the performance yet again from Joshua Orpin was just great. But this is when Mercy Graves' team busted in, and I have to say I found all of this following action to be great. Titans more or less showcased all of Connor Kent's abilities, from watching bullets fly in slow-mo to his speed and his strength, the bulletproof moment when he jumps in front of Lionel and the bullets just ping off. Then we got his mini little flight jump, if you will, through the wall, to where he even sucked up all the smoke and just blew it out in a very Superman-like breath. As a fan of all things like this, I truly didn't really have anything remotely to even complain about. And can we just freaking talk about Krypto for a moment? I just love that little guy. Him using his heat vision was just perfect, but then he literally flipping grabbed an RPG out of mid-air like a bone and then threw it out of the window. Now, honestly, I just almost have no words. I knew Krypto would be in this season, and I knew he would have powers as of the end of last season, you know, which is just a thing anyway. And for those of you who are wondering, like, the comic book logic for the Titans iteration of Krypto is just probably Cadmus Labs trying to apply the Kryptonian elements to another species first. But either way, I think he's adorable, I think he's badass, and as wacky as it is, it just fits perfectly within the show, and I just love DC Universe for things like this. But at the end of all of this is where we got another reveal of Connor's powers, which was of course X-ray vision, and he headed towards Eve in the car. So I briefly spoke about my fondness for her character in this episode earlier, but these moments onwards in the episode were truly a highlight for me. Now we learned from an observation from Mercy Graves earlier on that Eve more or less gave up what most people hold like near and dear, you know, family, a boyfriend, a dog even, to create Connor Kent. And I just thought that Genevieve Angelson, I don't know if I butchered that name, just did a fantastic job this episode with her performance, and I felt like the writing of her character and just story with Connor was woven so well together. At first, the episode approaches her as just some other Cadmus Labs employee with little to no moral compass due to being involved in the project that she was in, but throughout the episode and her journey with Connor, we're kind of given that explanation of how she was just initially hired by Cadmus to study the theoretical possibilities of cross-species cloning and how she came up with a plan to make someone like Connor, but she never actually expected Cadmus to go through with it. But then we learned that even though that she does have a lot more of a moral compass than what most people do who are employed by Lex Luthor, after Lex wanted to clone Superman but just couldn't quite figure out how, she reveals to Connor that she was responsible for giving Lex the idea that he needed human genes to kind of balance out the alien ones that Kryptonians had, and in so doing gave him the idea to use his own DNA to create Connor. And ultimately, since this plan was going forward, she also just couldn't really resist the urge to see if they could really do it. But what I felt was so good about this storyline was this internal struggle that Eve had during this episode. It just showed a humanity to her while also contrasting it with her like scientific fascination to pursue creating Connor Kent. But ultimately, she helped set Connor up with some basic tools for a world that he wasn't nearly ready for, and some funny but other times really emotional scenes. As she put it herself, he doesn't exactly have the maturity to do what's in his best interest because he immediately reacts, like when we saw that seemingly abusive boyfriend forcing this girl into his car. You get this Lex-like temper mixed in with this Superman-like call to justice, if you will. Either way, this just kind of showcases what I've been mentioning so far and how I'm looking forward to this impulsive attitude of Connor's to come into play in future episodes, but the Titans actually tackling it instead of Eve. Eve shows Connor Cadmus Industries, which got closed down as a result of an explosion where 16 people died in the past. As Eve said herself, this place is Lex Luthor, and she even described it as where the devil's work got done, because truly the stuff that Lex Luthor did was insanely messed up, to say the least, and we definitely got a glimpse at that. Yeah, again, I really love just how this added all to the dread of the character that is Lex, and I just really hope that they delve into that more as this season goes along. As I said, I'm not really expecting a Lex Luthor in the person. You never know, we might get a shadowy kind of figure in the distance, but that is reaching. But either way, I'm looking forward to a lot more Lex subtly scattered throughout the season. Now, what displayed this definitively, alongside Eve's lines of self-loathing and guilt through what she proceeded to do in the past, was the reveal of those 12 previous subjects of the cloning of Superman, shown to Connor to help realize what he is and where he came from. Now, of course, only a monster would do this, but that is when this touching scene happened between Connor and Eve, where she pointed out how while that is true, like only a monster would do that, that doesn't make Connor Kent a monster. She brought him here to warn him that he is not Lex Luthor, he is not Superman, but he is both. But the nice touch to it all was when Eve asked him why he did all of the things he did in the episode, like attack the Cadmus Lab security, and he said that was to defend Krypto because he heard him howling in pain. Or when he even defended Lionel Luthor, who was defenseless, to just point out that he was good. And I just love that line of when she said, just remember, people are not what they say they're going to do, they are what they do. And that is how Connor Kent can define himself, and you know, the same even applies for Raven. How this message even reciprocated that message from Corey to Raven last episode, and how she said, you know, you're not going to destroy worlds like Trigon did, you can choose to do good, which is definitely a theme for a few Titans this season. But this is when Mercy Graves' team arrives equipped with kryptonite bullets, and I have to admit that was definitely an oh shit moment, because yeah, you kind of just knew what this could mean for Superboy, obviously, with kryptonite bullets. And this brought us all up to the events of last episode, where Jason was falling, and there was many theories at the end of last episode from you guys, whether that would mean Corey would fly and Titans would showcase that through saving Jason. But as I said at the beginning of this review, some of you actually guessed that Connor would save him, and I actually didn't see that coming, to be honest, and I just loved that scene. It was just great seeing Jason Todd and Superboy meeting each other. I don't know, there was just something really nice about it. But this is where he got shot with 2 kryptonite bullets, and they seem to be in a a place where it would hit some major organs too. So, I mean, obviously he's not gonna die, but you know, it was like here and here. But the one thing I will say was a bit silly and irritating is that like nobody really looked behind them. Like, why was nobody looking at where the gunshots were coming from or how they were even subject to being shot themselves? Like when Corey and Dick Grayson arrived at the scene, quite literally Mercy Graves was standing less than 15 meters away right behind them, like where the direction of the gunshots were coming from. So that kind of made no sense to me. And of course I have to mention the feels of Krypto being apprehended by a, you know, kryptonite collar. But yeah, again, very confusing because, you know, in kind of real life, and yes, I know this isn't real life, if somebody shot someone, you kind of look over there where you'd be like, oh, I saw who did it. You know, it was just kind of silly because you saw how close they were to Superboy. So this episode, guys, as you can probably tell, my concluding thoughts was a great episode. Aqualad episode 4 is still my favorite episode of this season so far. But other than that, I would say that this was my second favorite episode out of the 6 episodes we've got. I think all I can do is just echo what I said at the beginning. Like, I knew we would be getting Superboy this season, and I knew it would be the whole Superman and Lex Luthor combination to him and how that would be interesting. But now we're actually seeing it on screen. I feel like this just makes him automatically such an interesting character, and I can't wait to see what is in store for him later on this season. What did you guys think of this episode? Let me know down in the comments below. As usual, I love reading all of your comments about it, and you know, if you enjoyed this review, guys, do me a favor by leaving a like on it. It really does show support for the channel and just helps this video get out there a little bit more. But this more or less wraps up everything I have to say in this video, so other than that, you can check out my past couple of videos here. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you Titans in the next video. Goodbye.